I hope you brought your Bibles, because if you do, I want you to get them out, and I want you to turn to Isaiah, and we are going to really work through Isaiah over the next 2 days, 3 days, however long we're together. I've kind of lost track. It's, I think, 6:30 Eastern time or whatever. But Isaiah is a symphony of grace. And how many musicians are actually out here? I know I was looking at your band. You probably have as many band members as Atlanta Temple. So good for you. It's a symphony that starts with this introductory theme, and you will know there's many themes, and then you know the symphony that kind of goes on after that. That main theme gets introduced and then played again and developed throughout time. Isaiah is going to look like that, where you have this introduction that we're going to cover this morning, chapters 1 through 6. This introduction of the theme that God chose his people, and his people didn't choose him. There's this cycle, and I'm sure you can't read that because it's too far away, and even my eyes are blurry from here. But there's this cycle of rebellion, reconciliation that God offers to us. Then there's sort of our refusal, and sometimes it's not quite a refusal. It's like an okay, but I still want to do what I want to do. And then there is this recompense, this judgment that he has upon us. And a lot of times that will kind of bring us back and say, oh Lord, I'm sorry. And then there will be restoration. God always promises restoration. I think that's why we can continue to pray for those who are lost that we love. You just claim them. Because God chose them. God made them. And they're his. And so there's this constant cycle that's going to go through Isaiah of rebellion, reconciliation, refusal, recompense, and then restoration. It starts here again, 1 through 6. And then you have a long exposition from chapter 7 through 39. We're going to read here in a second about chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "This is the vision concerning Judah and Jerusalem that Isaiah, son of Amoz, saw during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah." And there's those 4 kings. And as you go through the kings, you remember chapter 6 is in the year King Uzziah died. And then Jotham, you don't hear much about Jotham in Isaiah, but you get to Ahaz. And Ahaz is looking at the Assyrian armies, and he's wondering, what am I going to do? He's also looking at Israel, his northern, they used to be brothers, but they kind of have a broken relationship, and Syria, and they're looking to attack him. And so he's trying to think, do I make alliances with Egypt? Do I make an alliance with Syria? Who can I trust? And for how many chapters is that? 32 chapters. It goes on to ask, is the Lord worthy of being trusted? And then you get in 36 through 39, Hezekiah coming on the scene, and Hezekiah makes the right decisions. I trust in the Lord. Let's just see that with a little play. And then as we go, we're going to develop that a little bit tomorrow morning, going into 40, where you have this 150 years of time lapse in Isaiah. Some people talk about first Isaiah, which may or may not have been written by Isaiah, but certainly penned through Isaiah. But then 150 years later, who is this person who writes second Isaiah? Is it actually Isaiah prophesying into the future, knowing exactly what's going to happen 150 years from now? Is it another writer who, after they come back from captivity, starts to write about what the Lord's doing? Then you even have something that they call third Isaiah. And most scholars today don't even necessarily believe in a third Isaiah. It not necessary. But you have this 150 years that transpired that go from Assyria being the enemy or savior to actually coming back from captivity in Babylon for Judah. And then you have 56 through 66, where God then calls his people again and says, listen, I chose you in the beginning, and you failed. I chose you for one reason, not so that I could bless you, but that you could be a blessing to the nations, and that all people around the world will know of my love for them. But you took that love and you used it as something that you could just benefit from because you had these hard hearts and you didn't give my love away. Now I am calling you as a people. Now that I've brought you back, go. Go love this world that you're in. So we're going to get there then when we talk about things on Monday morning before we go. But let's look at Isaiah chapter 1. We already talked about these 4 kings, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, and they're kings of Judah. And most of you know that there are 2 countries at this point that constitute God's people. There is the kingdom to the south, which is Judah, which is pretty much the territory that was given to the one-child Judah. And then there are the other 11 tribes that make up this place called Israel to the north. And you may or may not know that the north had a series of bad kings. When Isaiah writes in chapter 1, it's about 150 years since the monarchy divided. You'll remember the 3 great kings, right? Saul. But Saul had a problem. What was Saul's problem? Jealousy, envy. He didn't quite even feel good about himself, and so he had to tear other people down. And then there was David, and David had a flaw too, actually. What was David's flaw? Lust, taking advantage of power, yeah. And then his son Solomon, actually, who built the temple, the wisest man that they said on the earth, and he actually had a fatal flaw. Anybody know what it was? He used the people around him to build up the wealth of Israel, of Jerusalem, at the expense of oppressing all the people around him. And so the kingdom was divided in half and given to Jeroboam and Rehoboam, and then that line of kings continues through until you have Isaiah and these 4 kings that we're going to talk about here in a second. And he starts off, here's the prophecy. Hear, O heavens, listen, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. I reared children. I brought them up, but they rebelled against me. The ox knows his master, the donkey his owner's manger, but Israel does not know. My own people don't understand who I am. Ah, sinful nation, a people loaded with guilt, a brood of evildoers, children given to corruption. They have forsaken the Lord. They've spurned the Holy One of Israel, and they turn their backs on him. Why should you be beaten anymore? Why do you persist in rebellion, whose whole head is injured, your whole heart afflicted? From the sole of your foot, you kind of get you get this, right? God loved his people, his chosen nation. And it doesn't look the way it's supposed to. Is there anything wrong with our nation today? Could we make a list? Who would be on the tops of those lists? Donald Trump. Yeah. And if you're in the South, it's Bernie Sanders. You know, yeah, we're not going to get in there. But and that's part of the problem, right? We are such a divided nation of extremism. You know, you're either one side or the other, and you go on Facebook, and I just want to scream. Can't we talk to each other? Can't we have a wonderful conversation and try to work these things out? Why do we lambaste each other? I mean, the violence, racism. It's a lot wrong with our country. And if you believe, I'm not saying that it's true, but if you believe that God blessed America because of its religious founding, because it sought after God in those initial coming over, then you got to say something along the line, somewhere somebody's not listening to what God had first blessed us with. Things are a little different. So here you have verses 2 through 9 where God talks about this rebellious nature. And then he shifts ever so slightly in verse 10 when he says, hear this word from the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Notice he compares them with the people that he's destroyed, right? Listen to the law of our God, you people of Gomorrah, the multitude of your sacrifices. What are they to me, says the Lord? I have more than enough of burnt offerings, of rams, of fattened animals. I have no pleasure in the blood of bulls and lambs and goats. When you come before me, who has asked you this trampling of my court? Stop bringing meaningless offerings. Your incense is detestable to me. New moon, Sabbath, convocations. I cannot bear your evil assemblies. Your new moon festivals, your appointed feasts, my soul hates. They become a burden to me. I'm actually weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands in prayers, I hide my eyes from you. Now, is he talking about what we would say nation? Is he talking about national pride or even national rebellion here? Who is he talking about? His church, yeah, his chosen people. Thank you. You realize this. He's talking about his people. We translate that if we look at ourselves here in Isaiah. It's not about the world going to hell in a handbasket. It's about the church going to hell in a handbasket. I'm tired of your worship services, he says, right? I'm tired of your offerings and you bringing your tithes and offerings and your life not changing at all. I'm just tired of you putting all these rituals of waving flags and putting on uniforms, and yet you in your personal life are not obedient to me. There's stuff in your life that you are keeping from me. There's stuff in your life that you're keeping from your fellow soldiers. You're putting on masks when you go to church, right? Amy and I were in pastoral ministry in the Wesleyan Methodist Church back a long time ago. In year 2000, I had a nervous breakdown when we were at a church. I was actually fired from the church. And here's what I knew. I was sick of doing church. I was sick of my job is just to kind of make that person in the pew happy so they could give money so that we could keep the lights on, so we could make a brand about ourselves, and that somehow we would just be this church run like sort of a business. I was so sick of it. But here's the clicker. I was the hypocrite. I was the number one hypocrite. I was chief hypocrite there. Because there was stuff in my life that was not lining up with God. And yet I stood in the pulpit every Sunday morning and put this mask on like everything was okay with my life. This is what Isaiah is trying to get across to us. We have a problem when we put our faith in all this stuff and miss this. There's this pivot verse in 15:16 when he says, look at your hands. They're full of blood. Wash yourselves and make yourself clean. In the midst of all your sinfulness, in the midst of, I don't even want to hear your prayers anymore, in the midst of, I don't want to hear another worship song, listen, if you would just, in this moment, whether it's hitting the altar or you right there in your seat saying, Lord, forgive me, in that moment, God promises this restoration to take away your evil deeds. Stop doing wrong. Learn what to do is right. Seek justice. Encourage the oppressed. Defend the cause of the fatherless. Plead the case of the widow. And notice what he's saying there, right? He's not saying, go sing more songs. Go play in the band. Join songsters. Can you teach Sunday school because we need a warm body in the place, right? He's saying, go out. It hit me first thing this morning when I'm walking to the core. And right there in front of the door is two people in a sleeping bag. And okay, this isn't my core. I don't know what your policies are here. You know, unfortunately, sometimes in Atlanta Temple say, hey, you need to move on, you know. I think one of the guys, did you like take out a cup of coffee or something? That's awesome. That's pretty awesome. It's not anything about our church. You're keeping it nice. It's about protecting and going out and reaching those people. That's what we're supposed to do. Encourage the oppressed. Don't kind of get on them about, they already know their life is crap, right? Encourage them. So come, Let us reason together. Though your sins are like scarlet, they'll be as white as snow. Though they're red as crimson, they'll be like wool. If you're willing and obedient, you'll eat the best from the land. There's this hope that God gives us. All we have to do is turn in this moment. But you're going to resist, and you're going to rebel, and you're going to want to do your own thing there, it says in verse 19 and 20. You'll be devoured by the sword, the mouth of the Lord has spoken. If you continually disobey me, there's only consequences coming. See how the faithful cities become a harlot. There's this refusal to do the work of justice by God's people. We really, at the Salvation Army's heart, we of all people should know how to get our hands dirty, and we don't. We want to be like other churches. There's enough Methodists, there's enough Presbyterians, there's not enough Salvation Armies, not enough soldiers. The uniform, I've always advocated that we should have an alternative uniform, because the uniform that we wear to church is what like generals and people kind of like walk into the war room with, right? Or dress Sunday, you show up in that. But on every day, what does a soldier wear? Camos and a t-shirt. I think we ought to have camos and a t-shirt that we're willing to get dirty and be out there with God's people. Sorry for the soapbox. Therefore, the Lord the Almighty, the mighty one of Israel, and I'm in verse 24, declares, I will get relief from my foes and avenge myself on my enemies. I will turn my hand against you. I will thoroughly purge away your dross and remove all your impurities and restore your judges as in the days of old. This sounds sort of like hope, but it is trapped like suffering. And this is the hope that God offers us. There's no hope, hey, everything's going to be roses and rainbows. The hope that God offers us is, I am going to sort of crush you and put you in the midst of a crucible. And out of that crucible is going to arise something really good. So if we're in the midst of suffering, we're in the right place. Sometimes we think, let me just get me out of the suffering, Lord. No, I think you just need to wait. Something's going to happen out of that suffering. Zion will be redeemed with justice. Not with, we pick on the musicians all the time, don't we? Give me somebody else that we can pick on. I don't know, but it just seems like we emphasize things in church ministries, and we de-emphasize some of the other really good stuff that God's asking us to do. And it goes on to say in verse 29, you're going to be ashamed. If you continue this rebellious nature, you're going to be ashamed because of the sacred oaks in which you've delighted. You'll be disgraced because of the garden that you've chosen. You'll be like an oak with fading leaves. Catch this again, verse 30. You need and if you want to take Psalm 1 and kind of put your finger there somehow and then look again at this verse. You'll be like an oak with fading leaves, like a garden without water. The mighty man will become tinder, and his work a spark. Both will burn together, and no one will quench the fire. Remember Psalm 1, where it says, if you meditate upon the Lord day and night, you'll be like a tree, planted by streams of water. And fruit, its fruit will come out in its season, and its leaves will never wither. The exact opposite. If you neglect me, if you neglect this relationship, if you harden your heart, even to what the Holy Spirit might even be saying to you right now, there is only withering leaves in your future. Chapter 2, he makes a real change. He says, this is what I intended my people and my kingdom to be. Verse 2. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established. chief among the mountains. It will be raised above the hills. All the nations will stream to it. Many people will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the Lord God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways so we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between his nations and settle disputes for many peoples. They'll beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore." Imagine days. This really doesn't work, does it? God intended, this is what he wanted God's people to be. But what does it look like? It looks like verse 6. You've abandoned your people, house of Jacob, even your own people. It's not even enough that you abandon the nations of the world. You oppressed and abandoned your own people. They're full of superstitions from the east. You've allowed all this stuff to come in. You've borrowed from the heathens, practicing divination like the Philistines, clasped hands with pagans. Their land is full of silver and gold. There's no end to their treasures. The land is full of horses. You trust in your wealth. You trust in your might. You trust in your idols. They bow down to the work of their own hands, to what their fingers have made. And then this pivot verse, again in verse 9. So man will be brought low. Mankind will be humbled. Hyphen, and my scriptures say, do not forgive them. Now, this is going to be a theme that you will get to eventually. It'll talk about the Lord's hand will be raised, and he will not relent. We have this really cheap grace mentality. Dietrich Bonhoeffer talks about it in The Cost of Discipleship, where when we sin, we do have this expectation that God will forgive us for that sin. So much that it becomes a game to us. We become real good at it. We're, okay, I know the Lord's got to forgive me, so I'll just go ahead and do it. Oh, yeah, I just don't have quite enough willpower, so, okay, all right. Okay, Lord, forgive me. I know I shouldn't have done that, right? I mean, it's the kind of mentality we have as Christians. And I really believe that God doesn't forgive that. Not if that's the kind of mentality you have. God calls for a humbleness and contrite heart. And what I have found is that your sin does always find you out. And there are always consequences for that behavior. So there's consequence. There in verse 10, go into the rocks, hide in the ground. The dread of the Lord is coming, the splendor of his majesty. Down to 19, men will flee to caves in the rocks, the holes in the ground. Dread of the Lord, the splendor of his majesty rises to shake the earth. In that day, men will throw away to the rodents and bats their idols of silver and idols of gold. We'll throw our 70-inch TVs to the rodents and bats. I really saw one that's really good. Sorry. They will flee to caverns and rocks. He repeats it, that the splendor of his majesty will rise to shake the earth. And then he says this in 22. Stop trusting in man who has breath in his nostrils. On what account is he? This is going to be a theme that is going to be continued for those 32 chapters in Isaiah in the next portion. Is who do you think you can trust? Can you trust the Egyptians? Can you trust yourself? Can you trust in your riches? Can you trust in horses and chariots and power and authority? Are you done? Stop trusting in man. Do you even trust in your leaders? Do you kind of think, okay, well, my leaders are going to make good decisions for me, so, and if they don't, then I'm going to be, No, the only person we can trust. We can't trust Trump. We can't trust Sanders. We can't trust Clinton. We can't trust Rubio. Can't trust Cruz. Can't trust... I'm going to just keep on going because you can't trust any of them. Not one politician is going to save us from the crap that we're in. Can I say crap? I'm not sure.
You can, yes. It's okay.
I can't. Okay. Not one government program. And may I also say, not one temple program is going to save us is going to save our kids, is going to save our souls. No program will do that. Only the Lord has the power to save. And that power is through relationships in doing the right things. So there's this problem. He's going to go in chapter 3 and take away things. The first thing he's going to take away is the removal of power and position from men. He's talking about, the warrior's going to be gone. I'm going to take away the warrior. I'm going to take away the judge. I'm going to take away the prophet, the soothsayer, the elders, all these people who think they're in powerful position. I'm going to humble them. And I'm just going to put kids in charge of them. It's kind of like, when maybe if you've ever had to kind of go back to work after sort of being dismissed maybe from the place where you were going through, and you have this 19-year-old kid who's now your manager. It just doesn't feel right. I'm going to put boys as their officials, mere children will govern, and they're going to oppress each other. Everything's going to be in chaos. And you're going to wish that you could be in leadership, but you won't be. And it's going to make Jerusalem stagger there in verse 8. And everything looks like it's going to come apart. They'll parade their sin like Sodom. Now, again, a lot of us, or a lot of the church, looks at this thing and they're thinking about, parades that, throw sin out there, like, yeah, Mardi Gras, whatever. I think sometimes even he's talking about the things that we parade, that we think we're doing right, when we somehow make even worship performance, and when we make social services a brand, we have begun to parade our sins. Tell the righteous, verse 10, it's going to be okay. They're going to enjoy the fruits of their deeds, but woe to the wicked. Disaster is upon them, and they'll be paid back for what they've done. Verse 13, he starts talking about this vineyard that he's going to talk about in chapter 5. That he plants this vineyard, and my own people have ruined it. So I'm going to keep removing things out of even my love. The next person he talks about is women. Talk about all the men, they're going to lose their power, prestige. Listen to what he talks about the men, the women. I'm going to take away their finery, their bangles and headbands and crescent necklaces and earrings and bracelets and veils. Almost sounds like a Dr. Seuss, their bangles and their... Interesting that in this paragraph, women are somehow seen to have this position by the way they look. And unfortunately, in today's society, more than men, and it's getting to be that way with men too, that we judge people on the way they look, the stuff that they have, and the fashion trends that they are. And I'm just going to take it all away. And we finally get to, let me just say chapter 4. There's this great line. Chapter 4, verse 1. We will eat our own food and provide our own clothes. Only let us be called by your name. These women are so desperate to tie themselves to a man for some kind of help. God says, I will be your husband. In that day, verse 2, the branch of the Lord will be beautiful and glorious. The fruit of the land will be the pride and the glorious survivors of Israel. Those who are left in Zion, who remain in Jerusalem, will be called holy. All who are recorded among the living in Jerusalem, the Lord will wash away the filth of the women of Zion. He will cleanse the bloodstains from Jerusalem by a spirit of judgment and a spirit of fire. And then the Lord will create over all Mount Zion and over all those who assemble there a cloud of smoke by day and a glowing flame of fire by night. Over all the glory there will be this canopy, which he will shelter and shade from the heat of the day, and the refuge and hiding place from the storm and the rain. Here is this great symphony. You have rebelled. I am going to destroy you. But there's coming a day, if you remain faithful, there's going to be restoration. You can count on me. It may not look it. You might wonder, where is God in the midst of all that? God is still there. He's walking through this darkness with us. But there is coming a day, if we rely on Him, if we remain holy, He will call us holy. He will go on in chapter 5 to sing of this vineyard that He had, that He did all these things, and He planted it, and He watered it, and He cared for it, and somehow it didn't produce the fruit that it was supposed to produce. And I'm reminded that sometimes we work really hard at trying to set things up, and we don't see fruit from it. People have their own choices. They can't make people. They can't make people come to the altar. Can't make people get saved. Can't make people, join the church. Whatever that might be. Only the Lord can do that stuff. And then He talks about this destruction that He's going to place on His own vineyard. And He has 6 woes that start in chapter 5, verse 8. The first woe, He says, to those who add house to house, join field to field, till no space is left. Those great houses will become desolate. And I'm thinking about wealth. People who just keep buying up property, more and more property, because that's what wealth would be for them. More and more stuff, buying more and more stuff for their man cave. Okay, I'm really stepping on my own toes here to try to keep this real. Maybe ladies, you buy more shoes. I don't know how that works, but they just keep accumulating more and more stuff. And I even went on, I thought about, we could talk about houses. We can even talk about, I'll be real with my own people, who, I know somebody really did think that they were doing the right thing by building the monstrosity that we have in Atlanta that's called our temple. And the amount of money that it takes to keep that up. And I just think sometimes your great houses will become desolate. I think about mega churches for a second. There's people who, I want to build this big church. They have all these great ideas, and they think, and I'm a dreamer too, and I like to dream those things. But you have to be really careful, because at some day, that sanctuary is going to be empty. Woe to those, verse 11, who rise early in the morning and run after their drinks and stay up late at night. They're inflamed with wine. So not only those who have wealth as their forefront, but also those who fall to temptations of liquor and extravagant lifestyle of wanting to run after pleasure, just make, delude myself so I don't have to think about all the other stuff that's going on. And God says, therefore, I'm going to put you in exile. Some of you are actually going to die from hunger. We know the consequences sometimes of even alcoholism. And can I also go to say, if I'm going to say that, and I have to talk about myself, can we even talk about diabetes? Can we even talk about that while we don't drink alcohol as Salvationists, we will engorge ourselves with chocolate cake? Ouch. I love chocolate. It's just as harmful, and we will die if we put this stuff, this poison, in our bodies. Then he goes on and says, but the Lord Almighty is going to be exalted by His justice. We've heard that before, right? Here's this theme again, that God still loves us. And then, woe to those who draw sin along in the cords of deceit, who mock God, saying, let's see if He can handle this one. Woe to those who call evil good. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes. Wise to those who are heroes at drinking wine and champions at mixing drinks, who acquit the guilty for a bribe and deny the justice. He summarizes all these woes to the point where he says, they have rejected the law of the Lord Almighty, and they've spurned the word of the Holy One of Israel. Therefore, verse 25, the Lord's anger burns against His people. His hand is raised, and He strikes them down. The mountains shake, and the dead bodies are like refuse in the street. There is the sentencing. Yet for all this, Lord's striking down His people. His anger is still not turned away. His hand is still upraised. He lifts up a banner for the distant nations, and he's going to call these people called the Assyria to come destroy his own people that he supposedly loves. Now, if we were to end right there, we'd all just go to our rooms and meditate in depression. You get to verse 30, the last verse of chapter 5. And it says, "And if one looks at the land, all he will see is darkness and distress, and even the light will be darkened by the clouds." Was he thinking about Seattle at that point? I'm just ready to see the mountain of the Lord when the sun comes out and see Mount Rainier in all its glory. But for right now, there's just all this darkness. You can't see what God is doing in my life. You can't see what God is doing. Ken, you just don't know the stuff that is going on in my body, the diseases that I'm dealing with. You don't understand the relationship issues that I'm dealing with. You don't understand what my family is going through. You don't understand my financial situation. You just don't understand this depression, this anxiety that I have, that I just can't even sleep at night. It's just all darkness. Compare that when we're going to eventually get to chapter 9. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. Or chapter 60 of Isaiah. Awake, awake, rise, for the light has come. But chapter 6 will do good enough for us for today. That in the year King Uzziah dies, I see this Lord high and lifted up. His train fills the temple. The seraphims come down. They have 2 wings covering their eyes, 2 their feet, 2 they're flying. And they sing this song, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty, and the whole earth is full of His glory." Now, we usually start with chapter 6. This is where it's kind of like our go-to place. But if you start at chapter 6, you miss all the reason chapter 6 is there. Because in the midst of all this mess, God is still on the throne. God is not gone. We can still trust Him. And He's on the throne, and His power is still there. And when I see it, what do I say? I say, "Woe is me! I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." Now, this section is sort of like A New Hope. Star Wars 4, is that what? I kind of get messed up when there's first 3 came before the original Star Wars, right? They're looking for a hero to save the day. He's got to learn about the Force. He's got to do... They're looking for a hero. God's looking for a hero. And his first thought is, I am not that guy. Because you don't know what's wrong with my life. Yes, well, I guess you do. So you certainly don't want me. And the funny thing is, the Lord just takes the tongs and He presses on and says, "You're for me. See? It says, cleanse your lips. Your sin is atoned for. It's gone. You want to use that crap as an excuse? No. You want to use all this stuff that's going wrong in your life as an excuse not to serve me? No. It's gone. But you have to give it to me. And it's not going to be given without real searing pain on your lips, right? There is a pain, there is a cost of giving it over. We have to be willing to take that. But He is looking for you because He says, "Whom shall I send? Who is going to be faithful? Who is going to go to this world that is so messed up?" And I'm reminded that we cannot go to a world that is messed up if our hearts aren't cleansed. If there is something between you and the Lord today, at whatever time you deal with it this weekend, you will be totally ineffective as a soldier in the Salvation Army, as an officer in the Salvation Army, if you don't get rid of it. And if it takes you the whole weekend to have that conversation, that debate with God, and that wrestle, with God, then let it be so and let it be clean. Because God wants you. But here's the problem. When we finally do say, okay, Lord, here am I, send me, what does he send us to? These people that I'm sending you to, they won't hear it, they won't believe it, they'll be calloused, they'll be dull, they'll close their eyes, they'll hear with their ears, but they won't understand. They won't be healed. They won't want to do anything that you ask them to do. And I'm reminded as a Salvation Army, my heart isn't as pure as it used to be. I used to be a bigger liberal Democrat than I am today. I find myself becoming more conservative Republican as the older I get, crotchety and curmudgeon-y. Because you start to work with people and you realize you're trying to offer this great reward for them, help them, and they don't want to do anything for themselves, don't want to help them. I'm working harder at this than you are. Come on now. How can I keep helping you? You come to me every time and there's always another crisis, and at some point you got to stop. You got to do what I'm asking you to do and be obedient to that, because it's going to get better if you would just listen. And at what point does that kid that you want to strangle in programs, who just will not listen, and you have to suspend him? Okay, you're suspended for a week. Okay, now you're suspended for like 3 weeks. Now your mom has to come with you if you want to come to program. I don't know what to do with you anymore. But when the Salvation Army throws away those kids, where do those kids go? When that alcoholic that sits at your front door, if we kick them away, who else wants them? I am reminded when he tells Isaiah, until the cities lie ruined, until the houses are left deserted, until the Lord has sent everyone away, you're just going to have to keep going and showing my love and preaching my word. You can't stop and say that somebody is worthy of help and somebody else is not worthy of help, because I made them all. You don't get to choose. All you get to choose is go out and help. And I'll figure out the rest. But as the terebinth and the oak leaves a stump when they're cut down, so this holy seed will be a stump in the land. And everything that will once be cut off, there will be this little green leaf that will rise out of the stump. Hope is coming. Are you ready for it?